herdsmen, so they decided the best thing to do would be to separate. And Abram sits there and he looks, and Lot decides that he's going to take the greener pastures, right? He's looking out across the valley and he sees the valley that Sodom and Gomorrah are in, and he decides he's going to go that way. Last week in chapter 18, Dean was teaching us that Abram's sitting there beneath his terebinth tree. He's relaxing, has his feet up in the air. He's having a good old time, and he sees a couple of men coming his way. So he gets up, he goes up to them and says, "Hey guys, why don't you come on over here?" And at some point he quickly realizes that it's the Lord and a couple of angels with him, right? And so he prepares this massive feast. He's sitting there talking, right? He's talking with God. And then towards the end of the chapter, we start seeing that, it's clear that the Lord came to judge the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, right? It says that he was, we'll read it here in a second. Basically, it says that the prayers, he's heard the prayers and that he has to go judge it. So he's sitting there talking with Abraham, and the angels, they depart from him. They start going their own ways. And Abraham sits there and starts going, "Lord, if there's 50 people here that are righteous, will you save the city?" And he talks them all the way down to 10, and then God's like, "Okay, well, we're going our own ways. Have a good time." So that we'll start right here in chapter 19, verse 1. Now the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. And he said, "Hear now, my lords, please, turn into your servant's house and spend the night, and wash your feet. Then you may rise early and go on your way." And they said, "No, but we will spend the night in the open square." But he insisted strongly. So they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house. They called to Lot and said to him, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so that we may know them carnally." So Lot went out to them through the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, "Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly. See now, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, that you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under a shadow of my roof." And they said, "Stand back." Then they said, "This one came in to stay here, but he keeps acting as a judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door. But their men reached out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they become weary trying to find the door. Then the men said to Lot, Have you anyone else here, son-in-laws, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in this place, in the city? Take them out of this place, for we will destroy this place before the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law, who had married his daughters, and said, "Get up out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city." But to his sons-in-law he seems to be joking. When the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, "Hurry," saying, "Arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in punishment of the city." And while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So it came to pass, when he had brought them outside, that he said, Escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed." Then Lot said to them, "Please, no, my lords, indeed now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, the city is near enough to flee, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. It is not a little one, and my soul shall live." And he said to him, "See, I have favored you concerning this thing also, in that I will not overthrow the city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Therefore the name of the city was called Zor. And the sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zor. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord and out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. But his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went out early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain. And he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land, which went up in like the smoke of a furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. So, as we just read right there, that's kind of like one of the big stories that when you think of in the Bible, one of the stories you think back on. And so we kind of start seeing a theme there as we break it down. But back into verse 1 right here, Lot is at the gate of the city, right? He's sitting there and he sees the two angels coming towards him. And as I was researching this, one thing I found extremely interesting is the amount of different points of view on this whole chapter and the way people interpret it. But one thing I thought was interesting is the cities in a biblical aspect are normally kind of like a town hall center type thing, right? Yes, they're in the walls and they, protect the city. But as they're sitting there, like a lot of the elders will sit in or high-ranking leaders will sit in there, and they'll go over small disputes and things like that. Basically, they want to be able to see who's coming in and out of the city. So, with that knowledge right there, it's clear that Lot had come. He left Abram. He's sitting there and he's looking at it. It kind of starts out as he looks across the valley, thinks that's pretty nice, and then he eventually turns his tent door and he's looking upon the city. And he kind of starts really absorbing it. Eventually, he moves into the city. He moves down there into Sodom, right? And the fact that he's sitting there in the gate shows that he's kind of assimilated into the city, right? It says later on that he's a sojourner there. And so he's sitting there, he sees these angels walk in, right? And at this point, one of the points of view that I find interesting is Lot doesn't exactly know they're angels, right? He's just sitting out there, he sees some men coming, right? And he bows himself with the face toward the ground, right? So he's being polite, right? It's kind of like you're shaking a hand. He sees them come in, he says, "How are you guys doing?" He bows, and he says, here in verse 2, and he said, "Hear now, my lords, please turn into your servant's house and spend the night. Wash your feet, then you may rise early and go on your way." And they said, "No, but we'll spend the night in the open square." But he insisted strongly, so they turned into him and entered his house. Then he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. So he says, "Hello, why don't you guys come over here?" And they're basically like, "No, we're here. We got a job to do. We got to go around. We got to look through the city. We're going to stay in the square and see how it goes." And he goes, "No, you guys got to come with me." It says he's insistent strongly, and so eventually they go, "Okay, we'll do what you ask." So he comes into his house, and one of the things that's interesting about the culture, these Middle Eastern cultures and stuff, is that once you become into their property, once you enter their gates, their household, that they you're under their protection, right? Because it comes in and it's late enough in the day where they're already talking about bedding down. They want to go to bed. They're going to stay in the town center. So things are winding down for the day, and they're all sitting there. And he goes, no, you guys don't have to stay in the town square. You think that's just a polite thing, but Lot, knowing the town and the way where he settled down, he was like, "No, you guys need to come with me." So it says they come in and he makes them a feast, right? Now this isn't necessarily like the feast that Dean was talking about last week, where they go and slaughter the calf and it's all this grand thing. They go with some unleavened bread, right? And unleavened bread, you can cook it in different ways, right? It might just be like a tortilla type thing, or it might be a cracker, depending on how you bake it. It's really good. It's a fun way to test the baking out if you want to do it, as long as it's supposed to be unleavened bread. If it's supposed to leaven and it doesn't, that's never fun. But they enter in the house, right? So he's basically saying, "Guys, come with me. I'll throw you some dinner. You guys can rest. Wash your feet up. You guys get up early and go do what you got to do tomorrow." And they say, "Okay, fine, we'll come over there." He makes them the unleavened bread, and some people view this as a way to see that the Hebrew people were already following the law before Moses. Others say it's just that's what he was doing. It was quick, it's easy, you don't have to wait for the bread to rise. And so that's another viewpoint there as well. So he sits there and they're relaxing, and then verse 4, they're just getting ready to lay down, it says, "Now before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both old and young, all the people from every quarter surrounded the house." Right? So they're getting ready to go to bed, and the stirring of the city starts coming up, right? It's getting dark, the idea of when it's dark outside, the crazies come out, right? And so it says both young and old, which I think is interesting, right? So this is a culture of the city. This isn't like a small percentage of people. This is the culture of it. And it says from every quarter, which is like not just like a part of the side or like on the side of the wrong tracks or whatever. The whole city's coming together. They're getting together, and they say, "Hey, Lot," right here in verse 5, "and they called to Lot and said to him, 'Where are the men that came in that come to you tonight? Bring them out so we may know them carnally.'" Right? So they're saying, "Hey, man, we seen them walking with you. Where are they at?" And then he goes, they're sitting there listening. It must be through the door or whatever. And it shows their intent here. They show their intent clearly, right? They want them to come out so they can basically rape them. They want to know them carnally. And when you look at this, obviously this is a big no-no, right? And you can see it all through the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. God's clear, the disciples are clear. This is not something that should be happening. And so with this idea here, one of the points of view from this whole chapter, like I said, there's a lot of dispute on it, is that Lot it says he's righteous, but he's making mistakes, right? And so he's assimilated in, he's at the front of the city, but then right here it kind of flops. It goes back and forth. People have different views. So he's accepting it, he's allowing it to happen of sorts, but then right here it says, "Bring him out so we may know him carnally." So Lot went out through the doorway and shut the door behind him, right? This is in verse 6. "And he said to them, 'Please, my brethren, do not do so wickedly.'" So this is something I find really interesting right here, is he goes out through the door, shuts it behind him, right? He doesn't want his house to, be in view. He doesn't want he's kind of protecting them, right? And the idea of, hey, they're in my house, they're my responsibility right now. When you listen to John Corson's study, it's really interesting, because he's saying right here, the fact that it says, "My brethren," he's accepting them. These are his friends. These are his people he's around. He's with them every day. He's saying, "No, you guys, we're friends here. Let's chill out," right? And then other studies go, it's kind of like a polite way to say, "Hey guys, no, let's just calm down." So that's something to think of as well, is like, depending on who you're listening to and what point of view you want to take this chapter, it could be two stories. You could either be saying, "No, we're friends here," or it could be just a way to say, "Let's all calm down." It says in verse 8, so he's trying to reason with these people, right? And then in verse 8 it says, "See now, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Please let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you wish. Only do nothing to these men, since this is the reason they have come under the shadow of my roof." In the verse 9 it says, "And they said to him, 'Stand back.' Then they said, 'This one came in to stay here, and he keeps acting as a judge. Now we deal worse with you than with them.' So they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near to break down the door." So this is where people really start disagreeing, right? Everyone I listen to, and this is what I read it, all says, okay, their intent is clearly bad. Lot is trying to be polite of some way. Maybe he is looking at it, if you want to look at it as him as the righteous way, he's trying to keep them safe, right? He knows how the city is. But then it flops right here to something interesting. It says that he says, "Hey, I got 2 virgin daughters. You can have them. Just leave these men alone." Which, I don't have any daughters, so this isn't like real for me. But if you think about it, this is a pretty big sacrifice, right? This is pretty much the ultimate sacrifice at the time. And this is another thing I find interesting. If you remember back in chapter 18, Abraham says, "If there's 10 people in this town, will you save it?" And so as we've gone through so far, we start counting it up. Well, one thing we got to keep in mind is that it says daughters plural, right? So we're going to see this here again in a second. So we have Lot, his wife, and at least 2 daughters here, right? There's 2 of them that have not known a man. And in verse 9, the men of the city go, "You stand back, let us in. We want these men here." And they say, "You came into our city. You chose to be here. You sojourned here, and now you're trying to change our culture. This is what we do here. Let us in. You're judging us here." And he says, "And because you're judging us, once we're done with these guys, we're coming back to you, and it's going to be worse." right? And so you can take that in whatever way you want. Maybe they want to rape Lot too, and then like take their wives into slavery. It doesn't necessarily say, but they're like basically rebuking him, and he doesn't realize it is. You've come into our town, you chose this, and you're still judging us. So he kind of flips back and forth, right? He's compromising here. He's like, you can have my daughters, but don't take these guys. He'll sit in the gate, but then he's trying to do the right thing. So it's like he doesn't really know what he wants to do here. And I think that's really important because, when we look in our lives, the compromises we make, the things we do, don't just affect us, they'll affect everyone else, right? This is now directly affecting his family. He's saying you can have them, and I'm sure his daughter's back there going, whoa, 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 like let's not get out here in this mob of guys here. But he keeps compromising. So he's trying to do the right thing, but when you look at it, is that the right thing? That's a rough one. And so it says right here in verse 10, but the men reached out their hands, pulled Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. And they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so they became weary trying to find the door. So at this point, Lot's probably realizing, okay, these aren't just some normal guys, right? I mean, if there's a whole crowd of people pushing Lot in, and they're pushing him against his door, and it's almost the force to break it down, there's obviously a large portion of people. So you could open the door, pull them in real quick, and close it. The fact is, if they're already almost breaking down the door, the strength it would take to reclose that door after it's been opened is going to be pretty substantial. And so you could be like, okay, well, pretty much just anybody could do that, right? I mean, I can close the door and nobody can get in. That's fine. But then it says right here in verse 11 that they struck the men who were in the door, who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so they became weary trying to find the door. So at this point, Lot must be realizing, okay, this isn't just like the normal, fella coming into town. These guys have something to him. So now he's probably starting to run it back through, going, okay, this is a little odd, because it says in the previous chapters that God's hearing the disputes. It must have been. There's the thought that Lot might have been the righteous man here praying, and he's going, hey, we need help here. God, save us. And so the angels come. They blind these guys. And it says, so they became weary trying to find the door. So these guys are blind, right? All these guys, they can't see anything, but they're still trying to break into the door. Their mission is set. They have a goal, and so they're trying to find the door to break it down. And in verse 12 here it says, then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here, son-in-law, your sons, your daughters, and whomever you have in the city? Take them out of this place, for we will destroy the city, because the outcry against them has grown great before the face of the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law. Actually, we'll stop right there in verse 13. So they save him, and they say, hey, bro, anybody you want with you in the city, you got to go get right now, because God sent us to destroy the city. So that must have been like a sobering thought, going, okay, God sent them to me. I have the chance here to save people, but the intent is clear, right? God is going to destroy this city. So if they've sent them to destroy the city, this must mean there's numbers here that aren't adding up, right? There's not even 10 people, because God said that he wouldn't destroy the city if there wasn't 10. And so we'll get that here in a second. And so Lot at this point is going, okay, this has become a whole situation that I'm not aware of. This city is going to go away. And so Lot goes out and he finds his son-in-laws who had married his daughters and said, get up out of this place, for the Lord will destroy the city. But his sons-in-law, he seems to be joking. So this goes back to one of those controversial things here that people keep disputing about. How many daughters did Lot have? Because it's plural, it doesn't say. So the thought is, did he lie in verse 8 saying that his daughters were virgins still and they weren't married yet? Or did he have additional daughters that were married, right? Because if he has additional daughters, that'd bring the number up. But then you have Lot, his wife, 4 daughters. Well, that's too many. I don't know how to count. Anyway, so the numbers here, they're starting to swing a little bit. But the point being is, it doesn't necessarily matter. It wouldn't matter if he lied or not. But here in verse 14, the sons-in-laws go, okay, you're joking, right? There's no way this is going to happen. Who's this God you're saying is going to destroy the place? Which shows that, on Monday, Dean, Elise, and I were talking about trust funds and stuff. So in a different context than we were talking about on Monday, his family didn't have enough of a trust fund for them to just up and leave, right? He wasn't ministering to them in the way that they would think, for them to basically decide, this is a joke. God wouldn't destroy us, So at this point, he's probably feeling a little bit defeated, right? But the angels did say, hurry, go find whoever you want to bring with you, which I think is another important thing, because, Jesus came and he died on the cross for us, and anybody can choose the gift. You just got to accept it. Are you going to say, hey, yeah, I'm going to go with you? Or are you going to be like, this is a big joke. That's too easy. Grace isn't enough. We got to do all this and that. And so this is an important thought as well, of not only are you ministering to your family, but with you ministering to your family, do they understand the gift? And so I was listening to a couple different teachers on this, and it was remarkable to me that John Corson was like, okay, he had the chance to go take them, and then like David Guzik was like, the way they interpreted it was way different. And so my point being is, when you guys listen to it, there are two different points of view, and they're amazing. You guys should listen to both of them. Right, Dean? So verse 15 says, when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, hurry, saying, arise, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. So before, the angels are saying, anyone that's here has the chance to go get them and leave. They're saying, hurry, get out of here, right? The time's running out. And then the next day, another thing was interesting is that kind of shows that the angels don't know everything going into the situation, right? God knew everything, and that's part of the reason he didn't go, because he can't be around the sin, right? But then the angels, at this point, don't know exactly how many people are supposed to be here. They say, go grab them all. Next morning, they're like, dude, you're still here. Grab your 2 daughters that are here and then leave, or else you'll be punished with them, right? Lest you be consumed in the punishment of the city. Which I think is a really interesting thing here, because the following right after that, right? Knowing that these are angels now, I couldn't imagine going, meh, I can take my time, right? I mean, everything will be fine. They blinded him. He knows these people are powerful. He knows that they must be angels. But he still lingers on. It says right here in verse 16, and while he lingered, the men took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. So at this point, they're like, dude, you're taking too long, you're lingering. And somehow they get from in the city to outside the city. Was it aliens? They get transported, they teleport. It doesn't say, obviously, but somehow they get them out of the city. This is a quick, everyone out now, no more time to sit around, which is really important, because at a certain point, God's going to be like, okay, this is the number. So it doesn't matter if you were ministering or if you're not ministering. At a certain point, he's going to take the people he wants out of the city, and everyone else there is going to be, part of the punishment. And so it's kind of like in the book of Revelations, where it says, come out, my people, lest you partake of her sins and receive her plagues. And so, because they thought he was joking, and because they didn't listen, now they have to suffer the consequences and the punishment. So they're outside of the city now. And verse 17 says, so it came to pass, when they had brought them outside, that he said, escape for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stay anywhere in the plain. Escape to the mountains, lest you be destroyed. Then Lot said to them, please, no, my lords. Indeed, now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me, by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, lest some evil overtake me and die. So at this point, the way I understand it, the way I'm reading it, is it's kind of taken by surprise, right? They weren't prepared to leave. They were taking their time. They didn't grab something and go. They just ended up leaving. So Lot's saying, hey, I don't got anything left. I don't want to go to the mountains. Something might happen to me. So instead of just listening to the angels and leaving and doing what he was told, he started questioning it, going back and forth. And it kind of shows the faith that he has here. He has enough faith to be like, okay, I'll go talk to my family, but he doesn't have enough faith to be like, okay, it's time to go. And so now he kind of looks like, into the mountains. He's like, escape to the mountains lest you be destroyed. So he doesn't go. He's kind of like, testing God at this point. But when you look at this, it's really interesting, because when we look at it with the hindsight 2020, and we've gone through the Bible and read it, a lot of amazing things have happened to the wilderness, right? Jesus was out in the wilderness before he went on his ministry. Abram took Abraham took Isaac to the mountain, right? All these things, these amazing things are happening in the mountains, in the wilderness. But you kind of have to have faith to go, right? Because when you look at all these stories, it takes an amazing amount of faith to be able to go out in the wilderness. Like, Jesus was out there fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, sitting there praying and talking to the Lord, preparing for his ministry. For Abraham to take Isaac to the top of the mountain, that would have taken an extreme faith as well. So he doesn't have, it seems here that he doesn't have enough faith to escape the mountains. He's worried that something's going to happen to him. He isn't ready to go. And so now he's kind of like, asking the angels, asking God here, going, hey, you guys saved me, so that means I have favor, right? And so, it says in verse 19, indeed now your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have increased your mercy, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains lest some evil overtake me and I die. See now, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Please let me escape there. Is it not a little one, and my soul shall live? So I think this is interesting because now he's kind of testing it. He's like, well, you guys already got me out of the city once. Like, why can't I go somewhere else? I don't want to go to the mountains. He's scared of the mountains. He says, how about I go to the city? It's just a tiny one, right? It doesn't matter. It's not like these big cities that have already happened. Even though, like, throughout the story, it already says the whole valley is going to be destroyed. You got to leave. Go to the mountains and be safe. And he goes, it's just a little city, right? And so this is an important concept too, because it's in the same area, same culture, right? Sodom and Gomorrah was evil, and he's like, but this is just a little less evil, right? It's just a little smaller. It's a smaller group of people. He's like, won't this be okay? One thing I think is interesting, though, is there's a question mark in there, right? So he's kind of questioning himself as he's asking for the favor. And so, verse 21, it goes on to say, and he said to him, see, I have favored you concerning this thing also, in that I will not overthrow this city for which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the city was called Zor. And the sun had risen upon the earth when Lot entered Zor. So this is happening all during the nighttime, because it says it had risen there. And from the research I did, Zor means like small city, tiny village type thing. So it's a smaller number, and it doesn't say how many there was. But I think it's important to think of when you have those small things in your life, those small little sins, right? They eventually open the door and bigger things happen, right? This small city is in the same area of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's only a small one though, right? It'll be fine. But we'll see that here in a second on what happens there. But anyway, so basically, he did find favor. He's like, fine, you can go to the city. He's not necessarily being in obedience though. Okay? And so he goes to the city, the sun rises, but it's interesting because it says in verse 22, it says, hurry, escape there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. So, I guess, in context, I don't know if he's still talking to the angels or the Lord, but he's basically it's happening is saying, you got to go because now you're kind of holding my plan up. You're holding it up, you're kind of testing the waters now. So he ends up going to the city, and then verse 24 here, then the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. So he overthrew those cities, all the plain, all the inhabitants of the cities, and what grew on the ground. Verse 26, but his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. So they enter the city, the sun rises, and then this verse right here, verse 24, it says, the Lord rained brimstone and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. And so, doing the research is kind of interesting because people are disputing, arguing, have different ideas on how these cities got destroyed. Some people are saying it was nuclear weapons, God dropped a bomb on them. Some people are saying that it could have been an asteroid, a meteor, it could have been volcanoes. And so the point being is whatever happened, it destroyed it, right? And so I think it's interesting because they're pretty sure they found where Sodom and Gomorrah's site is, but it's taken them so long, and it kind of shows the point that, God meant business. He was judging them here, and very little survived, right? And so he overthrew the cities. God overthrows the cities, right? All the plain, all the inhabitants, and what grew there on the ground. So it's interesting because the whole reason Lot came to this area was because it was luscious, right? Beautiful green grass, plenty of area for the herds to graze, plenty of water to drink. It would have been a pretty nice place, but because of the sin here, it was destroyed. It all ended up, right? And verse 26, but his wife looked back behind him, and she became a pillar of salt. So she's still wanting to be part of this area, right? This is her town. She's like, I want to still be part of this. What's happening? There's different ideas on it. Was she curious? Was she looking at it longingly? Did she kind of hold back? The point was, she wasn't necessarily thinking. And so this would be rough, because not only is your whole everything destroyed, you have family left in the city because they didn't listen to you, and you're probably running it back and forth going, okay, I'm probably the reason, or something happened here. Now his wife as well just became a pillar of salt, right? And so this is probably a pretty traumatizing day for the guy. And it's interesting because, in the New Testament here, Jesus says, you guys are supposed to be the salt of the earth. So are you going to be, the application here is, are you going to be salt that, flavors your food, purifies things? Or are you going to be the salt that, destroys stuff, looks back, and now you're just, become a pillar, right? And that's not necessarily the thing you want to do. So verse 27, well, I guess before that, I didn't explain this very well earlier, but throughout, multiple places, one of the greatest lessons I ever learned in my walk with Christ was several years ago. I remember I talked to Dean about it. Several years ago, I posted a meme on Instagram, and I had like 3 people respond to me going, hey, that's not what the Bible says, and blah, blah, blah. And so at this point, I'm still kind of like Bible bashing. I haven't really matured enough to talk about it. The meme was basically going, you need to talk to your family and be more inclusive about the LGBTQ plus community and going on. And then the father sits there and goes, okay, son, let's talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. And so, yeah, exactly, right? You're going to sit down, if you're being a leader of your household, you're going to sit there and you're going to go to the Bible and you're going to explain the way the world is, right? And so I had like 3 people lash back at me. That's not what it says. That's not what it says. It says right here, blah, blah, blah. And so I ended up doing this, well, I'll prove it to you. I'll show you. And it's interesting because the whole argument was the sin that got Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed wasn't homosexuality. It wasn't, the sexual immorality in general. It was, they're prideful, they're lying and all that. And so in Ezekiel 16:49-50, we're not going to read that one right now, but basically it's, pretty sure that's one. Maybe we should read it. Ezekiel 16:49-50. Flip there real fast. Sorry, I did not have it written down. Yeah, look at that. It's already highlighted. Okay, so Ezekiel 16:49-50. Look, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. Her daughter had pride, fullness of food and abundance of idleness. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy, and they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore, I took them away as I saw fit. So, in context right here, God is talking to, I believe is Judah at the time, right? They're saying, hey, you're a sister city to Sodom and Gomorrah. And it goes through a list, and this is one of the things that people were fighting on me with was, it was pride, they were gluttons, they had idols, or they were lazy. She didn't strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy, so they weren't helping the people around them. But this is right here, it says, and they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore I took them away as I saw fit. I think it's interesting there because that it kind of leaves open space. But the word that's used there is the same as in Leviticus 18 and Leviticus 20, when it's talking about bestiality, incest, and homosexuality. And so it also mentions that in Romans 1:26 and 28, and so that's a New Testament counter right there. So that is, the prayers are going up, God is upset, this is the issue that's happening. And so now we're going to be down here in verse 27. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. Then he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain. And he saw, and behold, the smoke of the land which went up like a smoke of the furnace. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had dwelt. So next morning, Abraham wakes up, he's looking, he's still at the place where he talked to God before, and there's just this pillar of smoke. This whole area is engulfed in flames, smoke, and it's interesting because right here in verse 29, and it came to pass when God destroyed the cities in plain, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst to overthrow, and when he overthrew the cities which Lot had dwelt. But somehow right here, Abraham knows, okay, God was faithful. I don't have to necessarily worry. And so, so, so then we'll go right here. So Abraham acknowledges that, okay, everything's fine, God was faithful. He's like, but this was a huge judgment, right? He's like, you see this here. And I was thinking about it while I was preparing this, was everyone that was left, right, would have been looking around and been going, whoa, something happens. You kind of got to wonder what was happening. But the other thing was, this small city that survived, right, was blessed in a way they didn't realize because Lot had gone there. If Lot hadn't have gone there and he didn't find favor in the eyes of God, that city would have also been destroyed. And so there wasn't enough people in Sodom and Gomorrah to keep it from being destroyed, obviously, because God still ended up destroying it. But maybe, this is the speculation here, but in Zoar, maybe Lot and his family was enough for that smaller number right there, right? And so instead of staying here and ministering and being a blessing to him, at some point here in verse 30 it says, Then Lot went up out of Zoar and dwelt in the mountains, and his 2 daughters were with him, and he for he was afraid to dwell in Zoar, and he and his 2 daughters dwelt in a cave. So for whatever reason, Lot goes, okay, I don't feel comfortable here. I don't feel safe here anymore. These walls that I'm used to aren't the same. I don't like it. He's traumatized. So he still ends up going into the mountains, right? It wasn't out of obedience. It was more out of fear. He didn't really know what to do. And his daughters went with him. And they ended up staying in a cave, which I find interesting because even though they were on a mountain, they weren't on the mountain top, being righteous and, saying, hey, the reason this happened is because you guys were being sinful. They weren't witnessing. They were just hiding. They were like, this is better than nothing. So they're hiding in the cave. And one thing I was doing as I was preparing was somebody showed it as in, I think it was Elijah. And how when Elijah was all sad and depressed, he ended up hiding in a cave too instead of being that light on top of the mountain. And so even though he was on the mountain, he wasn't necessarily being obedient. He was hiding. And it goes into verse 31. Now the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is no man on the earth to come into us, as is the custom of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that he may preserve the lineage of our father. So, for this family here, the whole world's been destroyed, right? Which is interesting because, their point of view, everything's gone. They don't have anything left. They're up in this cave. But there's 2 things that stand out. Either they brought their wine with them, or when they're in Zoar, they gathered it up and took it with them. So they had some time. But the other point of view here is that because they were in Zoar, they knew there was other people out there. So it wasn't like the whole world was destroyed. It wasn't like everything was gone. They could have looked around and seen there is still lush area. There is still people here. Yet they still decided to follow through with this. And one thing I found interesting just for me was it says the firstborn said to the younger. So it automatically means that the oldest one there has some sort of authority and has a way to maybe not deceive but lead the younger siblings astray or lead them into the way they should be going. So I think that's important as well, at least for me, is realizing that your siblings do look up to you in some way. And so it says, there's no man on earth to come into us, as is the custom of our custom at earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and he will lie with him and we will lie with him, that he may preserve the lineage of our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. It happened the next day that the firstborn said to the younger, Indeed, I lay with my father last night. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you go in and lie with him, that you may preserve the lineage of our father. So they give wine to the father. He's all sad, depressed, hiding in the cave. So he falls for it, and he's drinking. And this shows that in moderation, it's fine. It's a beverage. But when you go too far, issues start arising. And so instead of being like, okay, guys, there's a reason we're in this situation, let's rethink this, he goes, meh, why not, and follows through with them. He starts listening. So I don't know if he was deceived or if he's tricked or he was just depressed enough where he followed through. But then the oldest says to the youngest, right, the younger sister, hey, this is what I did last night. It's your turn. Which is interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, their sin from the reason the city got destroyed and they are now in the situation they're in is described in the same word as in incest, bestiality, and homosexuality. So, because Lot was in this city, he assimilated into it, his family now is affected as well. Because instead of going, okay guys, this isn't right, we don't do this here, he kept compromising, going back and forth. He was being part of the city, but then he wasn't. And so this is almost like it's just, this is what we do. This isn't weird. It doesn't say here that, it took too much convincing for them. They automatically thought of it themselves. So this is just what was happening. The oldest goes, they give wine to their father again the second day. Lot drinks it. And then right here it says, so the whole point is, they want to preserve the lineage of their father's name. Verse 35, then they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot were with child by their father. Their firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of Moabites to this day. And the younger she also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ammi. He is the father of the people of Ammon to this day. So they're sitting there, they're like, okay, it's almost like the intent is good, but with a terrible way they do it, right? So instead of going, hey, Dad, we got to get out of this depression. We got to go and we got to start doing the things and living life again. They fall right back into the sin. The oldest convinced the youngest. They're like, man, this is just what we do. We'll live it. We'll live life. They both end up having kids. And from there on, they just go. One thing it doesn't say in verse 19 or chapter 19 that I find interesting is Lot doesn't necessarily, I don't know if he knew what happened after, like, hey, we're the only ones up here and now you guys have kids, or what happened, but it's definitely interesting because of this, two new people groups are now there, right? And so the whole point of the chapter is the people who are around and the things we do affect others. The people who are around affect our lives in a good or a bad way. And it's important to keep an eye on your family so that they don't fall through and go in with sins of the way of the world. And so I think it's really interesting in that. But yeah. Lord, thank you that we were able to go through this study, and thank you for the opportunity that you gave me to teach this, Lord. And I just pray that as we go throughout the rest of the week, that we'd keep our eyes on you, Lord, and that we would continue seeking you out and trying to learn more and live a better life, Lord. I just pray you'd give us strength to do your will and to give us courage to actually follow through with it, and that we do it in a speedily way and not linger around. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.